When the WWF decided to go in a new creative direction with their Attitude Initiative, it was inevitable that people outside of wrestling and even organised groups would have issues with the more risque content that Vince McMahon was providing. This wasn't a case of a new wrestling organisation giving fans adult-themed wrestling shows. It was an organisation that was once, at its core, a provider of family-based entertainment. And because the World Wrestling Federation was seen as relatively kid-friendly, the Attitude Era and the complete 180 the company went through in order to get there really put a spotlight on wrestling as a whole. The Attitude Era gained the WWF a legion of new fans who enjoyed this more contemporary and updated product, but it also got the WWF a lot of attention from advocacy groups. One of those groups was the Parents TV Council, or the PTC, a group that was founded in 1995, and a group who would not only put forward their complaints to television producers, but a group who were also known for going after company sponsors. The PTC took offence to the WWF SmackDown show, a show that was on broadcast television, and a show that the PTC blamed for the deaths of young viewers who tried to emulate the wrestling moves that they saw on TV. The council announced that they managed to pull around 40 advertisers away from the World Wrestling Federation, but this was not true, and the WWF decided to fight back with a defamation lawsuit. In the end, the WWF would sue the PTC for not only defamation, but for copyright infringement also, seeing as the PTC were using WWF footage for their smear campaigns. In the end, it was settled out of court, and the PTC paid the World Wrestling Federation a whopping $3.5 million, along with a public apology. The PTC said they gave false information based on WWF advertisers being pulled, and they also admitted that those deaths that they talked about was based on false information. So now you know who the PTC were and their relationship with the WWF, and now you'll have a better understanding of why the RTC was a thing, the right to censor. During the WWF's ongoing conflict with the Parents Television Council, the promotion decided to parody the PTC with a wrestling faction who would literally try to censor the more questionable stuff that happened on WWF programming. It's really a classic case of Vince McMahon being Vince McMahon by using real life situations to create wrestling gimmicks. So today's video will take a closer look at the Right to Censor faction and some of the stuff the group got up to during their time in the World Wrestling Federation. The June 26, 2000 episode of Raw featured a unique match between Jerry Lawler and Dean Malenko. If someone was sent over the top rope, then the superstar's respective valet standing at the entranceway would have to remove a piece of clothing. This would continue until either Terry Runnels or the Cat were completely stripped. Just as Terry was about to take it all off, Stevie Richards showed up with a giant sign that covered up anything indecent, something that got Stevie a ton of heat from the get-go. On the following episode of SmackDown, Stevie would explain his actions by interrupting a planned match between the Godfather and Bull Buchanan. After the competitors and the Godfather's ladies came down to the ring, Stevie Richards came out to the entranceway, now wanting to be known as Steven Richards. Steven said that he saved WWF viewers from seeing Terry Runnels stripped down to her birthday suit, as if this was some kind of noble thing to do. Stevie goes on to say that he done what the network and what WWF producers couldn't do. He took the responsibility to censor what he considers to be vile, profane and unacceptable marketing materials. Stevie did what any respectable organisation would do if they had morals, and Stevie then sends a message to the Godfather. Simply put, the Godfather has to clean up his act, or Steven Richards will be forced to censor his activity. Bull Buchanan ended up beating the Godfather afterwards. On the following episode of Raw, the Godfather was again defeated, this time by test, and it was all thanks to Stevie Richards putting sacks over the Godfather's ladies at ringside. Richards was depriving the audience of what they wanted to see while also causing problems for WWF superstars, and Stevie Stevie's motivations and actions were extremely effective in terms of creating a new type of wrestling villain. Richards would say that the WWF audience doesn't know what's good for them, but he does. Stevie Richards would continue to censor the WWF while claiming to take responsibility for both the World Wrestling Federation and for those who choose to watch Raw and SmackDown every week. It became a regular occurrence. Stevie would try to cover up the WWF's moral shortcomings, and it was usually to the detriment of the superstars performing in the ring. It wasn't just the women of the WWF who felt the wrath of Stevie Richards though. Stevie would stop the Dudley Boyz from performing table moves, for example, by confiscating their furniture, deeming this type of hardcore wrestling to be unsuitable for viewers at home. On the July 17th, 2000 episode of Raw though, we would learn that others felt the same way that Stevie did. The Godfather challenged Richards to step into the ring, but Stevie backed out, saying that violence doesn't solve anything. The Godfather gave chase, but Bull Buchanan showed up, dressed just like Stevie Richards, and Buchanan attacked the Godfather. While Buchanan took care of the Godfather in the ring, Richards came out to remove the Godfather's escorts from the arena. So now Richards had someone else who believed in his cause. There would be two matches between Buchanan and the Godfather that took place on the following episodes of Raw and SmackDown. On SmackDown, Stevie said that Buchanan is a man who understands the consequences of certain actions. Buchanan has joined Stevie in fighting the good fight, and Buchanan is a man who has morals. After saying that the fans of the World Wrestling Federation should be thankful for their actions, Richards and Buchanan get interrupted by the Godfather. A match then takes place between Godfather and Buchanan, and the Godfather lost thanks to Stevie Richards. On Raw, a stipulation was added to the rematch. If Bull Buchanan lost, then the censorship of the WWF would end. If Buchanan won, however, then the Godfather would have to give up his lifestyle and say goodbye to his ladies. Buchanan won the match thanks again to Stevie Richards, and so the Godfather had to reevaluate his whole gimmick. On the 27th of July episode of SmackDown, Stevie Richards said that he and Buchanan received thousands of letters that thanked them for their recent actions. Proving that their efforts were not in vain, Stevie Richards goes on to introduce the latest member of the Right to Censor, the Godfather, now known as the Goodfather. Out walks the Goodfather dressed just like Richards and Buchanan, and the Goodfather apologises in the middle of the ring for his previous gimmick and character. The Goodfather says he should have been trying to set a good example. Love is not for sale, love is a gift, and love is a privilege. Cheering for the Godfather was wrong, and the Goodfather will no longer contribute to the moral demise of the United States. As a quick side note, Charles Wright absolutely hated this change of character. Charles loved being the Godfather, and he loved his previous gimmick so much that this change to the Goodfather led to Wright telling his friend The Undertaker that he was preparing to leave the WWF. Former employees of The Godfather began picketing Monday Night Raw, and The Goodfather had security remove the ladies, one of these ladies being future in-ring performer Victoria. Buchanan, Richards and Goodfather were then given the name The Right to Censorship, and the three men challenged anyone who didn't believe in their cause. The APA answered the challenge and a match took place featuring the Goodfather and Buchanan. The APA won the match, but the RTC delivered a beatdown at the end of the segment. On the following episode of SmackDown, the RTC, now known as the Right to Censor and not the Right to Censorship, decided they would close the Acolyte Protection Agency by removing all beer and cigars from their makeshift office. The Godfather was tempted to light up a cigar, but he was swayed by Stevie Richards. Because of these actions by the Right to Censor, the Acolytes obviously wanted revenge, but the RTC were able to defeat the APA later on in the show. The Goodfather was still having problems with his ex-ladies though, a few of which were still picketing WWF shows. The 7th of August episode of Raw featured a match between the Dudleys and the Right to Censor, and it ended with Victoria taking a vicious powerbomb through a table, courtesy of the Goodfather, showing us that the faction was absolutely blinded by their rather extreme form of morality. From a hospital bed, Victoria said she would sue the Right to Censor. The Constitution is supposed to provide people with certain rights and liberties, and you just know that this was all written by Vince McMahon and it was directed straight at the Parents Television Council. Let's move forward a bit because you can clearly see what the faction was all about, what they were trying to stop and what they were trying to change. At SummerSlam 2000, the Right to Censor took on Too Cool and Rikishi, and the Goodfather's old employees came to the ring with Rikishi. This distraction didn't stop Stevie Richards from picking up a victory for his teammates, a pretty big victory too, seeing as this happened at SummerSlam. The RTC's feud with Rikishi and Too Cool would continue. Richards wanted to censor Rikishi's rear end, and this would all ultimately lead to another member being added to the group. Rikishi had a match with Val Venis towards the end of August on SmackDown, and the Right to Censor got involved, leading to Richards hitting the big man with a ring bell and allowing Val Venis to pick up a victory. On the following episode of Raw, Richards announced that Val Venis was the newest member of the group, but Val came out and he said he has absolutely no interest in joining the Right to Censor. Venis calls the RTC a bunch of hypocrites who take away people's freedom of choice. Richards says that it's strange how Val began wearing white trunks, how Val has given up his previous gimmick, and how Val got rid of his association with Trish Stratus and the TNA tag team. Richards goes on to say that Val maybe doesn't see it, but he really is one of the Right to Censor. More Vince McMahon words come out of Val's mouth when Venis says that it's the parents' job to look after their kids and deem what is appropriate for their children to watch. It certainly isn't the responsibility of the Right to Censor. Anyway, the promo ends with Val pretty much saying he's against everything the RTC stands for. Later on in the evening, Venis teamed up with the Road Dogg to do battle with the Goodfather and Buchanan, and after losing the match, the Right to Censor brought Venis backstage where he was placed in a white van and the Right to Censor took off with the big Val Boski. The RTC was now coming across more like a cult. The following week on Raw, it was revealed that Val Venis had been converted. Venis showed up during a Buchanan and Goodfather versus APA matchup, and Val levelled Farouk and Bradshaw with a steel chair. The group now had 4 members, but they weren't done just yet. Another superstar would get added to the mix, but we'll come back to this in a moment. The RTC had their first 4-on-4 tag team match at the Unforgiven pay-per-view when they took on the Dudleys and the Acolytes. Even though the RTC won the match, it was still a pretty bad night for the faction. Stevie Richards took a beating after the final bell, and it all ended with Bubba Ray putting the Right to Censor leader through a table. This got an insane pop from the Philadelphia crowd. The following night, Raw officially moved to TNN, and during this broadcast, Chyna promoted her Playboy magazine photo shoot. The RTC naturally were offended, and so began a mini feud between Chyna and Eddie Guerrero and the Right to Censor. Keep in mind that Chyna and Eddie were also having their own problems during this time period. While Chyna was able to embarrass Stevie Richards later on in the broadcast, it was Chyna who was left embarrassed 2 weeks later when Eddie Guerrero was exposed cheating on his mamacita with the Goodfather's old ladies. Chyna was left all alone with the Right to Censor following a tag team match, but Billy Gunn ran in for the save. Eddie Guerrero would complete his full heel turn, and so Chyna and Gunn would begin feuding with Richards and company. The Right to Censor would continue ripping Chyna apart for her photo shoot in the weeks that followed, and this all led to a tag team match at the No Mercy show. Richards and Venis versus Chyna and Gunn. The match came to an end when Eddie Guerrero hit Chyna with a loaded bouquet of flowers, allowing the Right to Censor to score a win. Earlier in the show, however, Buchanan and the Goodfather weren't so fortunate. They took part in a Dudley Boyz table invitational, and they ended up getting put through a table after a match restart. The Right to Censor got their newest member the following night on Raw. During a bra and panties match between Trish Stratus and Lita for the Women's Championship, Ivory was revealed as the newest superstar who was prepared to fight the good fight. Having a female in the group made a terrible amount of sense. A woman's perspective on everything that was wrong with the World Wrestling Federation gave the Right to Censor a lot more to play with in terms of their cause, and on top of this, Ivory played the role so well that she ended up becoming a real standout for the group. Her performances were memorable. Ivory admitted to once being just like every other WWF diva, but she's now saw the light. The way the ladies of the WWF dress is absolutely unacceptable, and the beauty women possess on the inside is much more important than what's on the outside. This would lead to the Right to Censor getting involved in more women's matches now that they had a representative who could compete against the likes of Trish and Lita. And what's more, Ivory would end up becoming very successful during her run in the faction, winning the Women's Championship on the November 2nd episode of SmackDown following a Fatal 4-Way match. Also, on the following episode of Raw, Bull Buchanan and the Goodfather won the tag team titles. The Goodfather firmly believes that Vince McMahon made him a tag team champion so he wouldn't leave the WWF. Charles was still not happy with the creative direction that his character had taken. Survivor Series would see Ivory successfully defend the Women's Championship against Lita, while Buchanan and the Goodfather lost in their Survivor Series match. They teamed up with Edge and Christian to take on the Hardys and the Dudleys, and after the bell, RTC members got put through tables. Just a few weeks later, on the December 4th episode of Raw, fans got a shock when it looked like the Dudley Boyz had joined the Right to Censor. Bubba Ray and Devon came out wearing white shirts and black ties, and they caused a distraction that allowed Buchanan and the Goodfather to retain the tag titles. On the following episode of SmackDown, Devon and Bubba came out as fully fledged members of the RTC. Devon said that the Dudleys were lost, but the Right to Censor have shown them the right path, and Bubba Ray says that the RTC has shown the Dudleys that violence is wrong and scantily clad women are wrong. But then Bubba says that if those things are wrong, then the Dudleys don't want to be right. It was all a big setup. The Dudleys did not join the group, and Stevie Richards once again finds himself getting put through a table to end the segment. I totally forgot about this when putting together this video, and it was really well played by everyone involved. One of those forgotten segments that's worth checking out. Armageddon featured the Right to Censor in more matches, and it kicked off with Val Venis taking on Chyna. Val was brought down to the ring by Ivory. The women's champion couldn't help but get involved, and Ivory ended up costing Chyna the match. Chyna attempted to attack Ivory after the bell, but Venis made the save, so it looked like Chyna's feud with Ivory would continue. Buchanan and the Goodfather would lose their tag belts a little later on in a Four Corners match when Edge pinned Bubba Ray Dudley, but Ivory was able to once again successfully defend her women's championship when she won a triple threat match featuring Trish Stratus and Molly Holly. The following night, Chyna called out Ivory and a women's championship match was booked. Val Venis and Stevie Richards interfered, leading to Chyna taking a spike piledriver on Raw, a piledriver that would cause problems for Chyna in the weeks that followed. The Right to Censor would then make fun of Chyna by imitating her interview with Jim Ross, and it was around this time where the Right to Censor were maybe beginning to lose sight of their whole purpose, but still it was pretty entertaining to watch. Against Doctor's orders, Chyna competed in a match against Ivory at the 2001 Royal Rumble, and while performing a cartwheel back elbow, Chyna collapsed. Keep in mind that this was all worked, by the way. Ivory got the win, but China couldn't move afterwards. Medics had to stretcher the ninth wonder of the world out of the arena, and it looked like things had taken a bad turn here, but we'll come back to China soon. In the Royal Rumble match, all Right to Censor members who entered the bout failed to become the last man standing. The No Way Out pay-per-view would feature the final pay-per-view match that featured a Right to Censor victory. Jerry Lawler was an advocate for the more racy content that the World Wrestling Federation were providing, that goes without saying of course, and so Lawler found himself in a match with Stevie Richards at the pay-per-view. If the King wins, the Cat would strip, and if Stevie wins, then the Cat had to join the Right to Censor. It was actually the Cat who cost Jerry Lawler the matchup when she hit her husband with Ivory's title belt, and so it looked like the faction was adding yet another member. A pretty awkward promo took place the following night where it was clear that the Cat had absolutely no interest in joining the group, and when she got a little frisky later on during a Right to Censor match, she was escorted away by the Goodfather and Stevie Richards. And that was the last we saw of the Cat. She was then released by the World Wrestling Federation, and Jerry Lawler decided to quit also once he heard the news. The storyline with the Cat was abruptly ended, and the next episode of SmackDown featured Val Venis asking his Right to Censor teammates for forgiveness after falling to temptation. Apparently Val had a great time with an unnamed female, and so the Right to Censor fixed him. It all ended with a group hug and the APA once again taking out Stevie Richards, and you'd think the plan here was to have the Cat being the one who made Val fall off the wagon, and this is maybe why this promo felt a little out of place. At WrestleMania 17, the Right to Censor lost both of their matchups, the most prolific being China getting some redemption and beating Ivory for the Women's Championship. Taz and the APA were able to defeat Buchanan, the Goodfather and Val Venis also, so it wasn't a great night for the faction. Shortly afterwards, the group would disband, and the cracks began to form on the April 26, 2001 episode of SmackDown, when Richards, Buchanan, Venis and the Goodfather had a 4-on-1 handicap match with The Undertaker, a match that should have been an easy victory for the Right to Censor, but no. Richards wanted to get the win and he told his teammates to get out of the ring. The Undertaker then hit a last ride while the other RTC members looked on, and so Stevie was embarrassed again on TV. Buchanan, Venis and the Goodfather walked away afterwards, leaving Richards defeated and laid out in the middle of the ring. By the time 2001 came to an end, the faction was completely done with. The Goodfather, Bill Buchanan and Ivory lost to Steve Blackman, Trish Stratus and Grandmaster Sexay in a 6-man tag match, and that was it. The RTC had officially disbanded. Ivory would continue wearing her formal outfit for a month or so, but the group was removed from TV and the WWF carried on censorship free. The Right to Censor will never get named as one of the greatest factions of all time. They weren't considered main eventers, and their creation was another case of McMahon trying to poke fun at his enemies outside of a wrestling ring. But I do think that the idea of a group of guys trying to censor the WWF's Attitude Era was a really good one. It created a natural dislike for these guys, and it's one of those gimmicks that did make a lot of sense at the time. It's also hard to overlook where we are now with modern wrestling and the way wrestling is delivered. The Right to Censor maybe didn't succeed in cleaning up the WWF back in 2000 and 2001, but around 20 years later, the WWE sure has gotten a lot more family friendly. And what was once seen as very heelish and bad things to do is now accepted as the right thing to do due to the overall changes in society. So you could say that the RTC were quite prophetic with their message. Still, it all worked well for the Attitude Era. They may not have been the most celebrated faction, but they do have their place in WWE history. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching and take care.